Warning: the content of this video may cause a negative reaction in those with sensitivity to automotive transmogrification. Viewer discretion is advised.
As you've hopefully been watching in my previous episodes on the Ranchero, I've finished rebuilding its foundation. It's not going to fold in half anytime soon, which is good. But now it's kind of time we move on to the body and do some work in the bed. I did have some comments about my previous video about the microphone, and I kind of decided I'm going to just film it all with me talking into this GoPro instead of doing a voiceover, which is what I did before. I voiced over right into the video editor, which those microphones are sucky. Today we're going to bring you back to start looking at the next rusted areas, the wheel wells, because they're rough. I do have a pair of rear quarter panels that I cut off the other Ranchero, but they're really only slightly better, so I didn't know what I could do with them at the time. Started the work on this truck. I did let my fingers do some walking on the World Wide Web we weave, and I was looking for pictures of other Falcons and Rancheros that may have had this modification I was thinking of doing. I'm trying to decide whether to patch the factory wheel well openings, which I have, which isn't much, or use the extra front fenders I happen to have and make the wheel well flares out of those. I've seen it done before. And I know I can do better than I did on my first Falcon in 1976, 77. I was in my teens still, but I used a cutting torch back then. I just, wheels and tires had to fit, so I made them fit. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't bad. I mean, it was okay. But looking at the pictures I found on the line, I don't want the flares on this thing to look like some of the examples I've seen. It's like they took fenders and just welded them on the back of the car, and they kind of look like front fenders welded onto the back of the car. I mean, I didn't want that. The flare on the back of the Falcon front fender kind of does a little flare at the back. It's got the opening, but then at the back it does this little whoop. I didn't want that. I wanted just a straight radius, no aft flare like the Falcon front fender has. Like these pictures I'm showing you of a couple of them I found online. And as I thought more about making this change to the classic Falcon shape, the more I started to worry. I mean, what are people going to say? Will my club members impeach me? It's possible they could. Just to be safe, I decided I better ask my club constituents. They're the people that I happen to be the club president for. So anyway, I better see what they have to say. You got to listen to your people, or at least ask them. Let's just say they were not all that happy to hear I was planning to do this transmogrification to the classic lines that Ford designers graced us with in, like 65 years ago. They seriously considered kicking me out of the club for this. But thankfully, and by the grace of God, after some discussion, they convened and said, well, Roger, we really don't like what you're going to do with this, but, and this was unanimous, since your dues are all paid up and nobody else wants to be president, we'll let it slip this time, but we're watching you. Okay. Most of that was just a slight prevarication. My dues being paid and nobody else wanting to be the president. That part of it was true, but no, they weren't going to kick me out over it. Even though the purist in you might not like what I'm about to do to my Ranchero, any Falcon owner with anything bigger than stock wheels and tires knows it's pretty hard to get big wheels and tires out from underneath a Falcon because they've got those little teardrop rear wheel well flares. What I'm about to do is gonna negate that, at least for a while. I am offering my sincerest apologies to any of the purists out there that I'm about ready to irritate a bit. So given the all clear from my clubmates, today I spent some time working on preparing the front fenders that I'm going to use to fix my rear wheel wells, and I'm going to address the little flare that I was talking about a minute ago to make the front fender flare look slightly different for the rear. I think it turned out okay. I'm just trying to make the backside look symmetrical to the front side of the flare. That's basically it. So in these pictures, you'll see, I had to cut a pie cut, and I spliced in a piece and welded it all up. And so the front of the flare and the back of the flare were matching. That's what you're seeing here. So I've always said, I do my best thinking about my projects while I'm sleeping. And last night, a thought came to me. It's like, gosh, if you set a flare around a tire, they kind of need to match each other. The Falcon flare, because it was a slight teardrop, they set the wheel and tire kind of forward into that opening. But once you make that shape symmetrical to a tire shape, the tire kind of needs to fit into that opening. It can't be forward into the hole or rearward into the hole. So I decided I better ask the club, somebody, because I'd already taken this apart. And I guess I could have measured my wagon, but it was over in the storage garage, and I didn't have it. I didn't have the means of measuring it. So I asked my club group, if somebody could go out and just measure from the center of the rear wheel to the front edge of the flare, of the stock Falcon flare, and kind of tell me what that measurement is. That way I could actually take the width of the new flare, do some mathematication on it, and say, okay, well, I need to move the flare, some amount fore or aft inside where the original flare was. The measurement I got wasn't exactly close to what I was expecting. So in hindsight, which is always 20/20, I probably should have asked 2 or 3 more times, because this will come back to bite me in the future, which you'll probably see. I probably should have moved things forward about 2 inches, but of course I didn't realize it until much later. So there'll be a little head scratching in a future video where I find myself dealing with this. But anyway, once I cut everything out, I found holding the panel, the panel that I'm going to weld in, holding that up while I both traced it and while I tried to weld it in, I found that was a little on the difficult side. There are panel clamps, which I had, which you'll see a picture of here, but you got to get to both sides to use those things, and I couldn't get to the backside. I mean, it was in the wheel well, and there's no access to the backside, so that wasn't going to happen. They make Clecos, which are spring clamp kind of thing. I didn't have those back then. I ended up just using my big welding magnets. I had 3 or 4 of those, and they did a pretty good job holding it in place. There are pictures, this picture you'll see where I kind of welded a flat metal around the inside of the wheel well. That was basically going to bridge the gap between the outside of the fender and the inside of the fender with just this little flat piece. And that little flat piece will end up getting modified about 13 years later. I laid on my back and I modified all that. I'll throw a picture here of the modification of that I ended up doing. But you know, using the magnets and getting everything in there, I mean, I did slowly get this panel welded in. I used a MIG welder. I know now I didn't have a TIG welder at the time. That is better. In fact, I have only just recently learned that TIG welding is by far better for body panel work than MIG welding is, because the welds are softer. It's easier to, using a hammer and a dolly, flatten those out, smoothing the metal out, planishing the shape that you want. The one thing I do know for sure, having gotten the first panel on, it sure changes the look of this Ranchero. I mean, what a change. The driver's side was a little worse than the passenger side was, because I got my slice and dice out, I started cutting, and it was like Bondo dust is flying. I'm like, oh my gosh, is there even any metal here? I cut, and it's like I kept cutting, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is like all covered with Bondo. It was so bad. I eventually cut it out and got it down to where there was metal to weld to everywhere. But as you can see from these pictures, the whole bottom of the driver's side was pretty much toast. So yeah, it took a little bit of work to kind of get that all patched together. I didn't take a lot of pictures of that. You know, you'll see a couple as I'm sitting here jibber jabbering of the work that I did to kind of put that together. Ironically, as I'm showing you this part of the build, somebody on the forum, you know, asked me, is it ready for paint? And I'm like, what? We're not even close to being ready for paint. So here we are now. We're about 16 days, according to the forum, from the time I posted those last pictures to where we are today in these pictures. You know, lots of people probably thought I'd given up, you know, being so long between posts. But, you know, it was like Ranchero 1, Roger 0. No, I was working on it. You know, I'm done patching up the driver's side. You know, lots of metal was being replaced. You know, and it's good and solid again. Yeah, it just needs that dreaded bodywork being done to it, which I hate bodywork. I mean, I hate bodywork. I don't know. Maybe even the people that do it for a living don't like doing it. I don't know. The underside is done. Yeah, I've gone through it all. I've patched up those pieces that I told you I'm going to have to fix 13 years down the road. It's all seam sealed. I've put some undercoating down underneath it all. Now time, I guess, we go into the bed and do a little bit of work there. And I've kind of thought long and hard on what to do with this bed panel that Rancheros have. You know, it's called the smuggler's box by some people. I kind of consider it the area that if you don't see it, it's probably rusting away by the minute. It's that area underneath the Ranchero that almost always rusts out. The original owners rarely open that area up. I'm sure they just threw their junk in the back and drove it. And it wasn't until guys like me 50 years later come along and take that off and go, oh my gosh, you know, what was Ford thinking? Because this is the area, you know, that I'm talking about. If you look at a Ranchero and you look at a station wagon, they have one thing in common. They have the entire floor to share with each other. So where the back seat of a station wagon would be, that is the area in the bed that Ford just put a metal cover over the top up with screws holding it down, didn't seal it off. They just put this cover on. They drilled holes in the floor and said, it's good to go. something weird about surface tension of water, that kind of it will just stop flowing. A twig or a leaf or something would just plug up the holes and it would stop draining. Well, the same thing is true in a Ranchero. So unless you took that little cover off literally every spring and cleaned that little area out, these things would just clog up with crud and debris. This is a car that wasn't necessarily, garaged. It was out in the elements. It was a work truck. I mean, that people bought it not for show cars. I mean, it was used as a truck. Some of them are beat up pretty hard. There's not a lot of them left because, A, they got used as a truck. B, they rusted out like crazy because they got used as a truck and nobody cleaned out that little bed panel. So what you're looking at here is Ford, instead of making a solid bed in the back of the Ranchero, they just put this bed panel over where the back seat of the station wagon would have gone, and they put a bulkhead for the back window. I did think pretty long and hard about what I was going to do with that because I didn't want to maintain that. I had no plans on wanting to ever pull that off, that panel off to use it, as the smuggler's box, but I wanted to use it for something, and you'll see what I do with it eventually. But, I wanted access to it from inside the cab. I didn't want access to it from in the bed. So I decided I was going to seal all that off. And in order to seal that whole thing off, I had to build new structural support for it. The other part back there, which I guess would be one reason why you'd ever take that off as an end user, would be to change the shocks, because the bolts for the top of the shocks were underneath that bed panel. So I had to think about, okay, what am I going to do to access the shocks if I seal all this off? I'm not going to want to be able to crawl in from the cab and do that. So you'll see I just used these little stamped steel metal covers that were actually for a Mustang, and I put those over that part. I cut them out, figured out where they needed to be, and I cut those out on that bed panel before I sealed that bed panel in. So anyway, that, quite honestly, anybody that's doing a Ranchero build, and I did it to another buddy that's in the club not long after I did mine. He says, I want to do that on mine. So we went and did his too. I think it's kind of a no-brainer, especially if you're going to do some kind of a bed liner. I mean, my goal was to do like a Rhino lining or a Line-X or one of those brands. I hadn't decided which. I chose the wrong one, as you'll find out. But that was the plan. I wanted to just clean it up and just have a bed liner done to it and call it good. This was not going to be a show truck. This was going to be, I wanted to be able to use it if I needed to. It hasn't worked out that way, but that was the plan anyway. As you see, it's got a new bed support, and it's strong enough for anything I'll use it for. But it is something that, quite honestly, I think just about every Ranchero should probably have, because it was a really stupid design by Ford, if you want my opinion. But you'll see, I made the 1-inch square tubing around, and I had to make some supports around the curved part of the wheel well to hold that panel, because they had stamped some sheet metal to it that was supposedly going to be strong enough, but it really wasn't. It needed, for me to do the glue in, I needed support all the way around the thing. So that's what you've seen by now, is those pictures. So last night I moved back up front and did a little work on the engine bay and the core support, and I finally gave all that its first coat of 7777 Rust-Oleum satin black. That's what I painted this car with. It's what the engine bay got, and at least back then it was good paint. I have a new hood on here, as you can see, it's white instead of the black. But the work that I've done on this, which I have videos for it, but I painted this with the new formula, Rust-Oleum satin black. It's not the same stuff. It's not the same stuff. Why did they change it? Anyway, kind of irritating. But it's a little shinier and stuff. I have some I sprayed the body with a spray gun, not with rattle cans. But the original rattle can 4.7 Rust-Oleum was pretty much the same as the stuff you sprayed out of a quart can. You mixed acetone with it, and a very quick flash time, and it's been a very, very durable paint. I mean, I painted the car for $15 using the Rust-Oleum 7777 out of a quart can, using acetone as the solvent that they suggest to use, and it worked really good. Very durable. So today I am starting to install 3-point shoulder belts. After a bit of staring at this, I decided the first step would be to make a slot for the belts to pass through the package tray. Belts have to go through something. To make that happen, I drilled a pair of holes large enough to accept my smallest knockout punch. Then I used my sheet metal nibbler, which is just a handheld nibbler, and I cut the slot between these two holes, and then I took a pair of adjustable, pliers and used them as kind of a sheet metal tool, and I slowly bent them in a straight line and folded those little flaps over, deburred everything first before I did. So now the belt can pass through. I mounted the belt retractor, which contains the belt. I mounted that to underneath the package tray. I got the seat belt out of the same car, in fact, that I got the seats out of, so they matched the same color and everything, the red. Now I needed to actually make something for above your shoulder to mount that thing. So what I did is I just took, I looked through all the scrap of metals that I had, and I didn't have anything thick enough that I wanted it to feel thick enough for, like a big nut. But I had some metal strap, 3/16 flat metal, and I welded two of that together to get a nice, almost half-inch thick. And I drilled and tapped that to the thread that the seatbelt was, and then, they were about 7 inches long ish, and to get them up there, which is, it's that far up, however that is, probably 14 inches up, I had to get those things. So I just welded on a piece of scrap metal, sheet metal to those, so that I could stick them up the hole and lift them up. Then I could put a bolt at the top, and then I tightened up the bolt. And once I had the bolt tightened up, I lined it up to a couple of holes that I drilled besides the one that the bolt was in, and that's where I put in two very good tack welds to hold that piece in. So once that was all in and welded, I could then put the trim piece that goes over the outside. I also punched the hole in that in exactly the right spot. So, once it's up there, it looks like it's maybe as close to factory as if they had done it back in '63. It was better than what was there when I bought the car. Let's put it that way. As you can see, these would have saved me. Anyway, that's how I did a 3-point seatbelt in my Ranchero. Maybe it'll keep my chest out of the steering wheel in a case of an accident. We can hope. I've started painting some of the interior with the Rangoon red, which was a Ford color from back then. I've been doing a lot of other stuff that I hate, that bodywork stuff. I didn't take any pictures of any of that because I hate it. But, it turned out okay. It's going to need a little bit more work before I paint the satin black on it, but it's together. I can stare at a little bit more, kind of recover from the body work that I've done. That is just so stressful on a guy doing body work that when you hate doing something. I didn't think back in 2011, and I don't think in 2025 that this car met the qualities of a really good restoration. It could have been, somebody could have gone crazy, rotisserie the thing and all of that. That really wasn't my goal. My goal was to build myself a truck that I could drive around in today's crazy traffic, and I could do modifications to it. I could experiment with things on it, and it would be worthy of that. And I've done plenty of that. My mind was never set that this thing would ever be a restoration quality vehicle. I'm telling the story of the Ranchero, this Ranchero, because I've done a lot of stuff that I think can help people, building a Ranchero today. Obviously, if your car's done, it ain't going to help you much. You might enjoy watching this, you might not. I get views, but, not a lot of people are commenting, and I don't know how far you make it through. Maybe it's just like, I don't like this, but that's fine. I said this before and I'll say it now. I'm doing this because, I can, Anyway, I think we'll call it quits on this episode. I hope you're getting some ideas for your project. And if you are, please consider giving me a like, maybe even leaving me a comment saying, hey, that's a great idea, or, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Do whatever you do. And I'll appreciate it. You can hit the like, subscribe. You can hit this little bell on YouTube. That'll actually give you a reminder if I post another video. You'll see the next video in the series. And if you watch 3 minutes and 47 seconds of it, which is kind of what the analytics saying that most people are spinning, about 4 minutes, and then you get tired of it, okay. But if you watch it all the way to the end, in the words of St. Thomas Aquinas, I really appreciate it. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you on the next one.